I'm Jonah Comstock, Editor-in-Chief of Pharma Forum. I'm here at home a few weeks after JP Morgan. I'm joined by John Scarlett, the Chairman and CEO of Geron. John and I, or Chip, as you go by, we met at the conference. We recorded a great video interview, and unfortunately we lost it to technical difficulties, so we're giving it another go. And this has the advantage of we'll be able to talk about everything we saw and heard after the fact. So,
all right, great. Well, thanks a lot for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me twice.
Maybe we'll get it right this time.
So to start out, tell me and the folks a little bit about Geron, what you guys do, and what your kind of focus was going into the conference.
Sure. So Geron is a biotech company that has just launched last year its first commercial product, Rytelo, which is a first-in-class telomerase inhibitor with a very unique mechanism of action in that it kills the malignant cells in the bone marrow that are responsible for lower-risk myelodysplastic syndrome, or lower-risk MDS, as we call it. And so clinically, Rytelo represents a very highly differentiated treatment option for this particular disease and for, hopefully, in the future, diseases somewhat similar to that. And we believe it has blockbuster potential based on both the strong start to the launch that we've had and also to the high degree of unmet need. So that's really our focus today, Jonah, is on getting this launch off the ground and gaining as much momentum as we can. We have some other projects I'd love to talk about a little bit later, but that's what we're really all about today.
So tell me a little bit about this mechanism of action with the telomerase. Like how new is it? How novel is it? And what kind of makes it work?
So telomerase has been known for about 40 years. It's an enzyme resident in most cells, but certainly resident in stem and progenitor cells. And it turns on to permit pretty much unlimited proliferation of those stem cells when they in turn need to proliferate to make more differentiated cells. Like many cancers, blood cancers, such as lower risk myelodysplastic syndrome, myelofibrosis, these are areas we've been working in for a number of years. These cancers hijack that mechanism and basically constitutively upregulate telomerase, and in doing so, effectively immortalize the malignant clones that are responsible for the disease. Kind of a common story in cancer. What a telomerase inhibitor is it's in this case, it's an oligonucleotide. It goes into the nucleus of cells, and it actually inhibits this upregulated telomerase. And in doing so, it removes the ability of those highly proliferative malignant stem and progenitor cells from infinitely reproducing and proliferating. So in that regard, it's a really, really good approach to cancer in general. We think one of the reasons it's been very successful in these blood cancers is that there's also a lipid that's attached to the end, we attach to the end of this oligonucleotide, and that actually probably increases the length of time that the molecule is in the bone marrow, which is highly lipophilic, and that's where the action is with these disorders.
So tell me a little bit about what you've got going on this year, and some of the exciting news you have coming up or recently announced.
Yeah. Well, our Rytelo U.S. commercial launch is off to a really strong start. The product was approved in July of 2024, and the first 2 quarters of the launch really have exceeded many of the pre-launch expectations. In the third quarter, our first full quarter of launch, we booked revenues of $28 million, which was a solid beat versus the pre-launch consensus. And at JPM, we pre-announced estimated fourth quarter net revenues of between $45 and $46 million. And again, that means that for the year, we did somewhere around $75 million. We'll announce all the final numbers later in February when we do our regular earnings call. These sales numbers were also accompanied by other very encouraging commercial metrics. Through the fourth quarter, we had orders from almost 600 treating centers. That represented around 70% of our targeted key accounts. And this is up to this is up by almost 50% compared to the previous quarter. We've also seen steady growth in payer coverage. At the end of the fourth quarter, approximately 80% of the covered lives in the U.S. had Rytelo medical coverage that were consistent with either our FDA label, the Rytelo clinical trial results, and or the NCCN guidelines. So overall to date, this picture shows steady and consistent commercial growth that we do expect to continue into 2025. And maybe I'll just say, taking a longer term point of view, Jonah, Rytelo in this disorder, lower risk MDS, represents a really large market opportunity with blockbuster potential. This great potential is driven primarily by the high unmet needs in the lower risk MDS market and the significant product differentiation that Rytelo brings to the market. Overall, there are about 15,000 U.S. Rytelo treatment eligible patients in market segments that are consistent with our FDA labeling. Now, that Rytelo label is quite broad, and the drug has shown differentiated durable efficacy across key patient subgroups. Now, that includes both, as we call it, RS negative and patients, and also high transfusion burden patients. These results, along with our approved FDA label and very favorable NCCN guidelines, position Rytelo as the second-line therapy of choice, regardless of prior treatment. So the punchline here is that if we assume only a third of the treatment-eligible patients covered by our label are treated with Rytelo for at least 8 months, which was the duration of therapy that we saw in our phase 3 study, and at our current net price, we would exceed $1 billion in net revenue, which, that's kind of how you get to blockbuster categories.
Oh, that's very exciting. Of course, I mean, what sort of has to go right to get there from here?
I think our number one focus needs to be and is on the dynamics of the commercial launch and commercial execution. We're a small company, growing rapidly, but we're a small company. We have some extraordinary individuals that we've been able to attract to the company, not only in the development space, but also in the commercial side of the business. We have about 50 sales reps. We have, a good, healthy, over 100 people in the commercial organization. They go to work every day, working very hard to make sure we identify to appropriate physicians, patients consistent with our label, which, as I said, is very broad. And then we also have a very thriving medical affairs group and medical affairs establishment. We've buttressed that very recently with additional senior leadership. So between all of that, really it's execution on this launch and making sure that, in this case, hematologists really know that we're there and know that we have these great results. And hopefully they'll give us a shot with many of their patients. So that's our number one execution. Now, we're also very involved in the myelofibrosis space, and we have a very large and sophisticated phase 3 trial that's been underway for a couple of years in myelofibrosis patients who are relapsed or refractory to the current standard of care, which are JAK inhibitors. Myelofibrosis has a lot of pathophysiologic similarities to low-risk MDS. Both are diseases that are characterized by malignant transformation of stem cells in the bone marrow and proliferation of those malignant cells. And this similarity in disease mechanism actually encouraged us to begin the study of both MDS and MF, Josh, with imetelstat. So we're in the process now that we're launched in lower risk MDS. We're trying to bring home this large phase 3 study. And in the prior myelofibrosis phase 2 study, we saw a very strong signal for overall survival. And so we started this large phase 3 study with overall survival as the primary endpoint, and that this is the only study that I'm aware of, at least, that has overall survival as a primary endpoint in myelofibrosis. And so if the study's positive, we could potentially translate to doubling the Rytelo commercial opportunity. Now, we have a planned interim analysis that we currently expect will be conducted in the first half of 2026. Stay tuned. So I think I would conclude that in the future for Rytelo looks really promising as an important contributor to patient care in blood cancers like low-risk MDS and MF.
So, switching gears a little bit, a
Sure.
few weeks on past the conference, how was this show for you? Did you, accomplish a lot of goals? Did you meet interesting people? And what were some of the more broad takeaways in terms of the way we all kind of go to JP Morgan to see what other people are thinking and take the temperature of the industry?
I thought it was I wouldn't call it somber, but I thought it was a pretty low-key JPM myself. I don't know how you felt about it. You've been going to these things too for quite a while. I thought it was pretty low-key. I think, I have my own opinions about why that might have been. I don't think it had anything to do with us. It had to do with, broader currents and subcurrents within the industry. I think there's, whenever you have political change in Washington, there's always thoughtfulness about what that's going to bring to individual companies and individual industries. I think we still don't know exactly where that's headed, even after in the aftermath of JPM. We can talk about that if you'd like. And then the other thing is that there hasn't been, I would say, a ton of M&A activity, and that's what's driven a lot of JPM in the past, right? Big announcements come out the first day of JPM. We had a couple of healthy announcements, but not probably as many as in the past. So I think that just kind of contributed to investors feeling a little uncertain as to where the broad markets were going. And I think that just translated to a relatively soft JPM for many of us.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, people were definitely wanting to be excited and optimistic about the deal making environment, and there
Yeah.
were a few deals that sort of led us in that direction. But it's not as if a bunch more were announced as the week went on,
Yeah.
or even since.
Subsequently,
Really.
yeah.
So,
Mm-hmm.
of course, it's still new, and I know a lot of the talk was about the new administration, as you say, but I think people were a bit shy to give a lot of details on, just because they didn't know. It's such a big unknown. Now it's a little less of an unknown since the inauguration has happened, and a very, very dramatic first
Mm-hmm.
week has happened.
Yeah.
I mean, how is pharma? I mean, how are you feeling about things like the IRA right now?
Yeah. Well, I think that the question's really going to be, how do all of these initiatives, some of which you mentioned the IRA, which comes across from the Biden administration, which many of us were not enthusiastic about, to be honest with you, and tried to point out a lot of the kind of the soft spots in that legislation. But at the end of the day, it was put into law. I think a lot of this is going to boil down to, as you would expect, how is it actually rolled out in practice? What are the negotiations going to be like? Who's going to really lead those negotiations? What's the tenor of all that going to be? We don't have to deal with that for quite a long time. We're just brand new to the market. It's an orphan drug, et cetera. But I think that there is uncertainty. And I can say, when there's uncertainty anywhere in our very impactful but still not that large of an industry, we're not talking about automobiles here, we're talking about drugs. When there's, as somebody said, when somebody catches a cold in Denmark or in Germany, everybody starts coughing in the United States. And I think there's just a lot of uncertainty. The one thing that the biopharmaceutical industry really, really struggles with is uncertainty, because we have such long lead times and we spend so much money and we do so much planning ahead, because you kind of have to. You've got a lot of needles to thread, regulatorily, clinically, commercially. And so when you aren't 100% certain of exactly the ground that you're walking on, it just makes it harder. And it makes it harder in particular, I would say, for investors. So that's what I was feeling.
Yeah, well said. Well, I think we're pretty close to the end of our time, but any other thoughts about the industry or the conference?
You know, I think the I think the thing that I walked away with was that I felt really good about where Geron was positioned in in all of this. Not only do we have a strong start to the commercial launch, but we also are beneficiaries of a lot of, again, pre-planning that we did, and we were able to do a couple of, at the very, at the end of last year, we did both a synthetic royalty deal with Royalty Pharma, and also a very nice debt deal with Pharmacon. And these ended up with us having a year-end cash balance of about $500 million. And, I think that we are in a position potentially to not need to raise any more capital, especially if our sales trajectory and our OPEX go the way that we're anticipating and expecting. And that means that we should be able to get to profitability without additional dilution of our, at least equity dilution of our shareholders. If that's true, it'll be great. And so stay tuned. I feel very hopeful about that. And that's a big transition for any company to make, especially one that's been around like Geron for a lot of years.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time, Chip, again, for bearing with us through some technical difficulties. But it's
No
great to
problem.
hear your perspective here after the fact.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Joan. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. Look forward to the next time.